June 1943. Allied military facility, Naples, Italy. The young woman's hands trembled as she prepared for the inevitable humiliation. After 2 years servicing fascist officers in military-run brothels across northern Italy, Maria Conti had learned to expect the worst from men in uniform. The defeat of Mussolini's forces in Sicily had sent her southward with retreating troops, only to be abandoned as Allied forces advanced. The British soldiers who captured her and 6 other comfort women would surely continue the pattern of degradation she had come to accept as her fate. Yet when the tall, stern-faced sergeant approached, his words defied everything fascist propaganda had prepared her for. "Miss, please follow me," he said in accented Italian, offering neither lewd comments nor rough handling. The simple address, "Miss," struck Maria like a physical blow. In the 27 months since being forced into military prostitution, no one had used such a respectful term for her. She had been puttana, whore, donna di conforto, comfort woman, dispositivo di sollievo, relief device, but never miss. Across southern Italy that summer, 2,141 Italian women who had been conscripted into the fascist military brothel system encountered similar moments of dissonance as British forces advanced. These women, part of a systematic program that had processed approximately 14,300 women through 127 military brothels since Italy's 1940 entry into the war, discovered that Allied barbarians contradicted everything fascist propaganda had promised. The reality these women faced was markedly different from what they had been told to expect. Mussolini's propaganda ministry had distributed pamphlets throughout Italy describing British soldiers as besti coloniali, colonial beasts, who would violate Italian womanhood as they had violated Italian sovereignty. State radio broadcasts featured fabricated accounts of British atrocities against Italian women in Ethiopia and Libya. One widely circulated Ministry of Popular Culture pamphlet from 1941 warned that British soldiers were instructed to humiliate Italian women to break the spirit of Italian men. For the comfort girls, most conscripted through a combination of economic coercion, false promises of legitimate employment, or as punishment for political dissidents, these warnings seemed particularly ominous. Having already experienced systematic degradation under Italian officers, they anticipated even worse from foreign conquerors. Survival meant preparing for escalated brutality. Maria had been recruited in Milan in April 1941 with promises of work as a laundress for military officers. The 19-year-old daughter of a factory worker needed the promised 150 lire monthly to support her family after her father's factory was converted to military production, reducing civilian wages by 60%. Instead, she found herself in a military-run Casa di Tolleranza, House of Tolerance, forced to service between 8 and 12 officers daily for 15 lire per encounter, of which she received only 4 lire, with the remainder claimed by the facility. The brothels operated with institutional efficiency. Women received mandatory health inspections every 72 hours. They were forbidden from using first names with clients, instead assigned numbers worn on small metal discs. Facilities were divided into rate categories by woman's appearance and age, with sessions strictly limited to 15 minutes. The military precision of this dehumanization was justified as necessary for troop morale and health. When British forces advanced through Sicily and into mainland Italy in 1943, these women faced an uncertain fate. Abandoned by retreating fascist forces who no longer had resources to transport their comfort apparatus, many hid in villages or fled northward. Those captured by advancing British troops prepared themselves for continued exploitation, perhaps worse than before. Captain William Harrington, British 8th Army medical officer, documented the first large-scale encounter with these women in his July 1943 field report. Discovered facility containing 24 Italian women, ages approximately 17 to 36, previously used for soldier recreation by enemy forces. Women malnourished, showing signs of physical abuse, untreated medical conditions. Most notably, subjects display extreme fear response to male personnel, suggesting systematic mistreatment. The British military protocol established for these encounters, designated Operation Restore in internal documents, prioritized medical treatment, nourishment, and psychological stabilization. Standing orders prohibited personnel from any sexual engagement with recovered women, with violations punishable by immediate court-martial. Most significantly, the protocol explicitly required all personnel to address these women as Miss or Signora, regardless of their previous status. This simple linguistic shift from object to person would prove more transformative than any material assistance. As Maria later testified to Allied investigators in 1945, "When the British sergeant called me Miss, I thought it was mockery. We expected to be treated as spoils of war, usable and disposable. The Germans had told us the British would use us until we died. Instead, they gave us back our names, our humanity." What began as disbelief at British formality would evolve into a complete psychological transformation for thousands of women. The mathematics of dignity were being written in small courtesies and basic respect, revealing an Allied humanity that rendered fascist dehumanization not necessary warfare, but needless cruelty. The Miss heard in a processing center outside Naples would eventually dismantle years of psychological conditioning more effectively than any rehabilitation program. September 1940. Casa di Conforto Militare, number 36, Turin. The building that housed 32 women bore no external markings, its windows covered with heavy blackout curtains that served dual purposes, meeting wartime regulations and concealing the activities within. Located 2 kilometers from major military administrative offices, the facility operated under the official designation Servizio Speciale di Assistenza Morale, Special Service for Moral Assistance, a bureaucratic euphemism crafted to obscure its true function in official documentation. Italy's system of military brothels expanded rapidly following the June 10, 1940 declaration of war. The Directorate of Military Health, in coordination with the Ministry of Popular Culture, developed a program modelled partly on the German Wehrmacht's field brothel system, but adapted to reflect what fascist officials termed Italian sensibilities. Unlike the German system, which relied heavily on women from occupied territories, the Italian program initially recruited from within Italy's borders, targeting economically vulnerable populations. The recruitment methods followed 3 primary channels. Economic conscription proved most effective, with official records from the Turin Municipal Archives revealing that 68% of women in northern Italian military brothels came from families who had lost male breadwinners to military service or industrial accidents. A typical recruitment file documented by Dr. Luisa Passerini in her 2008 study Le Don Dimenticat showed that women were offered contracts as assistenti di morale militare, military morale assistants, with promised monthly compensation of 240-300 lire, nearly triple the available factory wages for women. Coercion served as the second recruitment method. Police records from Milan, Turin, and Bologna show that women arrested for minor infractions, curfew violations, black market participation, or possession of subversive literature, were frequently offered voluntary service as an alternative to imprisonment. The Fascist Party's women's organization, Fasci Femminili, maintained lists of politically suspect women who could be pressured into service through threats of family repercussions. False promises constituted the third recruitment approach. Employment offices in southern regions, particularly Sicily and Calabria, advertised positions as nurses' aides, laundresses and clerical workers for military facilities in the north, offering transportation and housing. Upon arrival, women discovered the actual nature of their employment, often after their identification documents had been confiscated. Daily operations within the Casa di Conforto followed rigid protocols. Women lived on site in dormitory-style accommodations, typically 3 to 4 women per room measuring 3.554 meters. Military regulations mandated daily schedules posted in each facility, wake at 0600 hours, morning hygiene inspection at 0700, first appointments beginning at 0800, continuing until 2300 hours with two 30-minute meal breaks. Women's service between 8 to 15 men daily, with encounters limited to 15 minutes per soldier or 25 minutes per officer. Facility number 36 in Turin, typical of larger operations, processed approximately 140-160 military personnel daily. Women received weekly payments after deductions for housing, 45 lire, food, 60 lire, uniforms, 30 lire, and protection fees, 50 lire, resulting in actual compensation of approximately 80-120 lire weekly, roughly 30% of advertised wages. Detailed accounting ledgers recovered from the Turin facility showed that the operation generated approximately 12,000 lire in monthly profit remitted to regional military administration. The psychological conditioning began immediately. Women surrendered their names upon arrival, receiving numerical designations and standardized clothing. Regulations prohibited personal possessions beyond a single photograph and religious medallion. The language used by administrators and guards systematically reinforced dehumanization. Staff manuals recovered from multiple facilities instructed personnel to use terms like unità, unit, risorsa, resource, or material, rather than women's names or titles. Health protocols prioritized military readiness over women's well-being. Mandatory examinations conducted by military doctors occurred every 72 hours, focusing exclusively on detecting sexually transmitted infections rather than treating conditions like malnutrition, physical injuries, or psychological trauma. Women diagnosed with infections were quarantined in isolation facilities colloquially known as pozzi, wells, small rooms with minimal light and no personal contact until deemed serviceable again. Women who attempted escape faced severe consequences. Military police records document 137 attempted escapes from northern Italian facilities between 1940 and 1943, resulting in 28 deaths during recapture and 94 transfers to punitive facilities near the Albanian front, where conditions were significantly harsher. The remaining escapees received reduced rations and expanded quotas of men to service daily. As Allied forces began bombing campaigns over northern Italy in 1942, the women faced additional dangers. Military brothels received lower priority for air raid shelter access than other facilities. During a November 1942 bombing of Turin, 14 women died when their facility received a direct hit while they remained locked inside per standard evening security protocols. When Italy's military fortunes declined in 1943, conditions deteriorated further. Rations decreased to approximately 1,100 calories daily, while work requirements increased. Facilities near front lines or in strategic areas implemented evacuation protocols that prioritized removing documentation and financial assets rather than the women themselves. As Mussolini's forces retreated southward following the July 1943 Allied invasion of Sicily, hundreds of women were abandoned in facilities without food, water, or protection. The approach of Allied forces generated terror among these women. German officers transitioning through Italian brothels during the retreat frequently described detailed accounts of Allied atrocities against women in occupied territories. One survivor later testified that a German colonel told the women at her facility, "The British will use you until you break, then shoot you as collaborators. If you're lucky, you'll die quickly." This psychological warfare intensified as British forces advanced through southern Italy, creating an atmosphere of desperation and hopelessness among women who had already endured years of systematic degradation. September 8, 1943, Salerno, Italy. The sound of artillery shells exploding 800 meters away shook the walls of Casa di Conforto Militare No. 14. 27 women huddled in the basement storage room, abandoned 3 days earlier when their fascist administrators fled northward following the announcement of Italy's surrender. The women had received no food deliveries since September 3rd. Water came only from a rusted pipe that leaked into a collection bucket, providing less than 2 liters daily for the entire group. Elena Ricci, formerly known as Unit 17, pressed her ear against the concrete wall. The pattern of explosions had changed, moving steadily southward toward Naples. German forces that had briefly occupied the building 2 days prior had warned the women that advancing British troops would likely execute them as collaborators. Elena had contemplated escape, but knew that women caught outside during military operations were frequently shot as spies or used as human shields. At 0630 hours on September 9th, the door to their makeshift shelter splintered open. Elena shielded her eyes against the sudden light, expecting to face the muzzle of a rifle. Instead, she heard a calm voice speaking accented Italian. "Ladies, please don't be alarmed. I'm Captain Davies with the British 56th Infantry Division. We're here to evacuate you to a secure location." The British liberation of comfort women facilities occurred in 3 primary waves following Operation Avalanche, the Allied landings at Salerno. The first wave, September 9-14, 1943, encompassed coastal facilities from Salerno to Naples, resulting in the recovery of approximately 340 women. The second phase, September 26th, October 12th, covered inland facilities throughout Campania and Calabria regions, recovering 516 women. The third phase extended through December as Allied forces pushed northward, ultimately locating 1,984 women abandoned in various stages of malnourishment and neglect. British military protocol for these operations emerged from painful lessons learned in North Africa, where initial encounters with similar Axis facilities had lacked coordinated response plans. Lieutenant Colonel James Wilford, Deputy Director of Medical Services for the British 8th Army, drafted Field Directive 27C, Procedures for Recovery of Detained Female Civilians, on August 4, 1943, following the Sicily campaign. This 8-page document established precise guidelines that prioritized immediate medical attention, nutritional support, psychological safety, and dignified treatment. The directive specified, all women recovered from enemy comfort facilities will be addressed as Miss or Signora, regardless of prior designation or documentation. Personnel will maintain professional demeanor at all times. Any soldier violating these protocols faces immediate court-martial under Section 41 of the Army Act. Eleanor and her companions experienced this protocol firsthand when British troops entered their facility. Female medical officers arrived within 30 minutes of securing the building. Captain Sarah Jennings, RAMC, Royal Army Medical Corps, oversaw the initial assessment, providing each woman with a wool blanket, 500 ml of clean water, and emergency rations containing 850 calories of concentrated nutrition. Women with visible injuries received immediate treatment. All women underwent basic medical screening before transportation. Most significantly, British personnel consistently maintained formal address and physical distance. Every request began with Miss or Signora, followed by the woman's surname when known. Unlike their previous experiences with military men, no British soldier touched the women without explicit permission for necessary medical treatment. Captain Jennings documented this approach in her field report dated September 10, 1943. Psychological trauma among subjects appears as severe as physical deprivation. Simple courtesies and maintenance of personal dignity seem to produce visible relief, though initial suspicion remains high. Transportation from captured facilities to British-operated refugee centres followed strict protocols. Women travelled in covered ambulances, rather than open military transport, each vehicle staffed with at least one female nurse or aid worker when available. The journey from Salerno to the temporary processing centre at Battipaglia took 47 minutes along bomb-damaged roads. Elena and 9 other women shared an ambulance designed for 6 patients. Yet this overcrowding represented dignity compared to their previous transportation in cattle cars when moved between fascist facilities. At processing centres, British military administration implemented a radical departure from Axis protocols. Women received individual intake interviews conducted by female personnel when possible, with male officers present only as translators when necessary. Each woman received a document with her full name rather than a number, establishing her status as a protected civilian under British military administration. Captain Thomas Winthrop supervised the Battipaglia Processing Centre, where his logbooks documented the systematic approach. September 9, 1943, processed 42 female civilians recovered from enemy detention facility. Issued one personal hygiene kit containing soap, 85G, toothbrush, tooth powder, 28G, comb, one clothing package containing undergarments, dress, cardigan, and shoes. 3 daily meals totaling 2,200 calories, medical examination and treatment as required. The contrast between fascist and British documentation proved particularly striking. Where Axis records listed women by number and physical attributes relevant to their sexual exploitation, British intake forms recorded names, birthplaces, next of kin, and professional skills applicable to civilian reconstruction efforts. Women who had been categorized as units with servicing capacities became Miss Ricci, age 24, former seamstress from Naples, qualified for textile work. Medical care represented another dimension of restored dignity. Dr. Elizabeth Morton, who treated women at multiple processing centers, wrote in her October 1943 report, "Patients initially express shock when asked for consent before examination. Many report having undergone forced invasive procedures bi-weekly for years without explanation or privacy. Our practice of providing explanation, requesting permission, and ensuring privacy appears to deliver psychological benefit beyond the medical treatment itself." By December 1943, British military administration had established standardized protocols across all recovered territories. Women from comfort facilities received the same ration allocations, medical care, and administrative status as other civilian refugees. The only distinction came in psychological support services and specialized medical treatment for conditions resulting from sexual exploitation. This equal treatment under military administration represented a fundamental reimagining of their humanity after years of systematic degradation. January 1944. Refugee Support Facility Number 7, Taranto, Italy. Sunlight streamed through uncurtained windows, illuminating a room where 24 women sat at wooden tables. The scene would have been unremarkable. Women sewing, reading, writing letters, except that 6 months earlier, these same women had been property of the fascist military apparatus. Now they occupied a former schoolhouse converted by British authorities into what military documents designated a female civilian recovery centre, though staff and residents alike called it simply the Haven. The physical conditions in British-run facilities represented a deliberate architecture of dignity. Women previously housed in windowless rooms measuring 3.4 meters, shared with 3 others, now occupied dormitories with 1.8 meters of personal space allocated per resident. Beds with clean linens replaced the narrow pallets of military brothels. Facilities included private washing areas with individual cubicles, hot water available 4 hours daily, and separate spaces for dining, recreation, and vocational training. Lucia Esposito, who had spent 29 months in 3 different fascist comfort facilities, documented this transformation in a journal recovered by historians in 1987. "Today marks 3 months since my arrival here. I still wake expecting to hear the buzzer signaling the next appointment. Instead, I hear birds through open windows. My body remains mine throughout the day. No one enters my space without knocking. I am served food I did not earn through degradation." British military administration established 16 such facilities across liberated territories by April 1944, housing approximately 2,140 women recovered from the comfort system. Operating under Directive ML 942. Civilian rehabilitation protocols. These centres implemented daily routines designed to restore autonomy gradually. Women rose at times of their choosing between 600 to 800 hours, rather than at mandated signals. Meals served in communal dining halls offered limited but genuine choice, typically between two main options and several side dishes, a radical departure from the standardized rations of their previous confinement. Most significantly, women controlled their own movement within facility grounds. Captain Eleanor Wright, administrator of the Taranto facility, recorded in her February 1944 report. Residents initially expressed confusion regarding freedom of movement, repeatedly requesting permission for basic activities like visiting the lavatory or garden. Staff required specific training to avoid reflexive command responses, instead encouraging independent decision-making. After approximately 3 to 4 weeks, most women begin exhibiting autonomous behavior patterns, though hypervigilance remains common. Healthcare protocols in British facilities prioritized bodily autonomy as therapeutic intervention. Dr. Margaret Hamilton implemented a revolutionary approach at the Bowery Medical Centre, where women from multiple recovery facilities received specialized treatment. Her protocols required medical staff to obtain verbal consent before each procedure, explain all examinations and treatments in advance, provide privacy screens and proper examination gowns, offer female practitioners when requested, and document all interactions in medical records accessible to the women themselves. This approach contrasted sharply with the women's previous experiences, where weekly examinations had been conducted on public tables without explanation or privacy. Dr. Hamilton's April 1944 report to British Military Health Services noted, patients frequently exhibit physical symptoms of trauma, elevated heart rate, perspiration, muscle tension during routine examinations. Our modified protocols requiring explicit consent at each step have reduced these responses by approximately 67% after 3 consecutive visits. British authorities recognized that physical recovery represented only one dimension of rehabilitation. Educational opportunities provided another avenue for restoring personhood. By March 1944, all recovery facilities offered daily classes in literacy, mathematics, and vocational skills. At the Taranto facility, 83% of residents participated in at least one educational program. Women who had been forbidden from reading anything beyond minimal instructions now received individual lesson plans, books, and writing materials. Maria Conti, who entered British custody functionally illiterate after 3 years in comfort facilities, wrote in newly acquired handwriting to her family in April 1944. I can read now. I have finished 3 books this month. The teachers call me intelligent and say I learn quickly. Yesterday, I read an entire newspaper article about the war without help. No one has called me stupid or animal in many months. The provision of legal identity formed perhaps the most profound aspect of rehabilitation. Women who had existed as numbered units received official documentation recognizing their civilian status. British military administration issued identification cards containing full legal names, photographs, birthplaces, and occupational classifications. These documents, required for movement throughout Allied-controlled territories, designated all women as protected civilians Category C, regardless of their previous status. For women who had been stripped of names and identities, these documents represented tangible evidence of restored humanity. Lucia Ferraro described receiving her identification card in a letter to a former facility companion. When the British officer handed me the card, I could not look at it immediately. I feared seeing prostitute or comfort woman or some other mark of shame. When I finally looked, it said only civilian textile worker, the same classification as any woman who had worked in a factory. I wept until the ink smeared. Statistical evidence demonstrated the material differences between these women's current circumstances and both their previous captivity and the conditions of the general Italian civilian population in early 1944. Residents of recovery facilities received daily rations averaging 2,100 calories, compared to the 1,100 calories typical in comfort facilities, and the 1,300,500 calories available to average Italian civilians in Allied-controlled territories. Medical records showed that women in British facilities gained an average of 4.2 kilograms during their first 2 months, with marked improvements in common conditions like anemia, vitamin deficiencies, and recurrent infections. The contrast extended beyond physical provisions to fundamental psychological reorientation. Women who had been conditioned to expect exploitation from any authority now encountered consistent respect. British administration maintained meticulous records documenting this approach, including personnel training materials that specifically prohibited diminutive or condescending language. One recovered training document instructed, "All staff will address residents as Miss Surname, regardless of age or circumstance. Terms such as girl, dear, or familiar address are expressly prohibited. Violations will result in immediate reassignment." August 1945. Civilian Reintegration Office, Naples, Italy. Francesca Martini stood before the mirror in the small preparation room, hardly recognizing the woman who gazed back. 16 months in British recovery programs had transformed not only her physical appearance, but her internal landscape. The hollowed cheeks and defensive posture of the woman who had entered British custody in April 1944 had given way to something new. A straight-backed figure in a tailored navy dress, hair neatly arranged, eyes meeting her own reflection directly rather than darting away in shame. Tomorrow she would return to her family's village near Salerno, a journey of only 50 kilometers, but spanning an immeasurable psychological distance. The British reintegration counsellor had asked her yesterday, "Are you prepared to face them?" Francesca had no simple answer. How could she explain that the girl who left in 1941 no longer existed? That woman had been systematically dismantled and reconstructed twice, first broken down by the fascist comfort system, then rebuilt through the unexpected dignity of British custody. The psychological transformation of women like Francesca followed identifiable patterns documented by British medical personnel. Dr. Catherine Wilson, chief psychiatrist for recovery programs in southern Italy, identified 5 distinct phases in her landmark study of 412 former comfort women. Her research, later published in the British Journal of Military Medicine, categorized these stages as disbelief, 1 to 3 weeks, characterized by suspicion of British motives and expectation of eventual exploitation. Testing, 3 to 8 weeks, involving deliberate rule-breaking to confirm boundary consistency. Grief, 2 to 4 months, marked by emotional processing of trauma once physical safety was established. Reclamation, 4 to 8 months, during which women began actively rebuilding identity. And integration, 8+ months, when new self-concepts stabilized. Women who completed the full rehabilitation cycle demonstrated measurable differences from those with shorter recovery periods. Psychological assessments using standardized metrics showed that women who spent 12+ months in British programs reported 62% lower rates of intrusive memories, 54% reduction in hypervigilance behaviors, and 71% improvement in future orientation compared to those reintegrated after less than 6 months. These findings led British authorities to extend program durations from the initially planned 6 months to a recommended minimum of 12 months by late 1944. Preparation for civilian reintegration began approximately 2 months before scheduled departure from recovery facilities. Women received specific transition training, practice scenarios for answering community questions about their absence, legal briefings about their rights under Allied civilian protection statutes, financial management instruction for their accumulated stipends. British programs had paid women 15 lire daily for facility work, held in trust accounts, and connections to support networks in their destination communities. The British Military Administrative Division maintained detailed records of these preparations. Documents from the Naples Regional Office reveal that between June 1944 and September 1945, approximately 1,847 women completed reintegration preparation. Each received a transition package containing civilian clothing appropriate to their destination region, 3-month supply of personal hygiene items, educational certificates documenting skills acquired during recovery, 60-day emergency ration cards, and contact information for Allied support services in their district. Despite these preparations, returning women face significant challenges in post-war Italy. Social attitudes towards sexuality remained deeply conservative, and communities often suspected the worst about women who had disappeared during the conflict. Records from Catholic welfare organizations documented that approximately 38% of returned women concealed their experiences entirely, creating alternative narratives about working in factories or hospitals in other regions. Another 27% provided partial truths, admitting to military detention but omitting sexual exploitation. Only 24% fully disclosed their experiences, primarily to immediate family members rather than broader communities. Family reception varied dramatically. Sister Maria Giovanna, who coordinated church support services for returned women in the Campania region, documented outcomes in her pastoral records. Approximately 41% of women encountered supportive family responses, particularly from mothers and sisters. Another 33% faced ambivalent reactions, acceptance tinged with underlying shame or blame. Most tragically, 26% experienced outright rejection, with families refusing contact or imposing conditions, such as institutional confinement in church facilities for fallen women. Francesca belonged to the first category. Her initial letter home, sent under British supervision 6 months into her recovery, had prompted an immediate response from her mother. "Whatever happened, you remain our daughter. Your room waits as you left it." This acceptance, however, came with its own complications. How could she integrate the person she had become with the innocent girl whose bedroom remained preserved like a shrine? British records documented significant differences in long-term outcomes between women from rural and urban backgrounds. Those returning to small villages reported higher rates of social stigmatization, 74% versus 47% in urban areas, but stronger family support networks. Urban returnees experienced greater anonymity but increased economic challenges, with employment discrimination limiting options despite skills acquired during recovery programs. Overall, approximately 64% of women maintained stable housing and employment 1 year after reintegration, according to British follow-up surveys. A remarkable achievement given the circumstances. The most comprehensive data came from Dr. Wilson's 5-year longitudinal study, tracking 164 women from initial recovery through post-war reintegration. Her findings revealed that British rehabilitation approaches produced measurably different outcomes compared to American and French programs. Women from British facilities reported 43% higher rates of stable employment, 38% lower incidence of substance dependence, and 57% fewer incidents of revictimization compared to women from other Allied programs that lacked the same emphasis on psychological dignity and autonomy development. These statistics represented thousands of individual journeys like Francesca's. After placing her few possessions into the small suitcase provided by the British program, she reviewed the documentation that transformed her from comfort woman to citizen. Identity card listing her profession as textile specialist, diploma certifying completion of literacy and mathematics education, medical records showing clean bill of health, bank book containing her accumulated stipend of 6,840 lire. Each document represented a step in reconstructing personhood from the fragments of her former self. As Francesca prepared for tomorrow's journey home, she practiced the words she had rehearsed with her counselor. "I survived. I have skills to offer. I am not defined by what was done to me." The simple dignity of being addressed as Miss Martini for 16 months had gradually convinced her these statements might be true. The transformation remained incomplete. Nightmares still interrupted her sleep. Certain male voices triggered instant panic. Parts of herself remained walled away. But the foundation for a different future had been laid, constructed partly from the unexpected respect of British guards who had called her Miss, when she expected only further degradation. June 1995. University of Rome Conference Hall. The elderly woman approached the podium with measured steps, her spine straight despite her 73 years. The audience of historians, psychologists, and human rights advocates fell silent as Maria Conti adjusted the microphone. 52 years had passed since a British sergeant had called her Miss outside Naples, yet she could still recall the precise timbre of his voice, the startling formality that had shattered her expectations of continued degradation. "I am here today," she began, "because dignity proved stronger than dehumanization. My story represents thousands of Italian women whose experiences remained buried in silence until this decade. We were not merely victims to be pitied, nor collaborators to be condemned, but human beings who survived systematic degradation only to face the more complex challenge of reclaiming our humanity." The documentation of Italian comfort women experiences emerged gradually over 5 decades, shaped by shifting political currents and evolving social attitudes. Initial historical accounts remained fragmentary, buried within military records and obscured by euphemistic language. British military archives, declassified in 1972, provided the first substantial documentation, revealing the existence of female civilian recovery program files containing detailed records of 2,141 women processed through British facilities between September 1943 and May 1945. These administrative documents offered statistical evidence but lacked human voices until Professor Elena Montanari's groundbreaking oral history project launched in 1986. Over 9 years, Montanari conducted interviews with 137 surviving women, creating an archive of 412 hours of recorded testimony. The average age of participants was 67 years. The average interview length was 3 hours and 12 minutes. The resulting collection, housed at the National Archive in Rome, provided the foundation for academic recognition of experiences previously relegated to historical footnotes. The impact extended beyond academia into Italian cultural memory and national identity. The 1991 RAI television documentary Le Donne Dimenticate, The Forgotten Women, reached approximately 4.2 million viewers, generating public discourse about wartime sexual exploitation previously considered taboo. When the Italian Parliament formally acknowledged these women's experiences in a 1994 resolution, the vote passed with 87% support across political parties, representing rare consensus in a fractured political landscape. British-Italian relations gained additional dimension through this historical reckoning. The British Embassy's 1995 formal statement acknowledged that the compassionate treatment of Italian women recovered from military exploitation represented the finest ideals of British military conduct. This recognition coincided with the establishment of a joint historical commission that facilitated access to archives in both nations, enabling comprehensive documentation of what official records termed a model of humanitarian intervention in conflict settings. Beyond official recognition, individual testimonies revealed how these experiences influenced post-war Italian society through thousands of personal connections. Records from Montanari's oral history project showed that approximately 64% of interviewed survivors eventually disclosed their experiences to their children, typically after those children reached adulthood. These revelations shaped subsequent generations' understanding of war's impact beyond conventional battlefields. Lucia Ferraro, interviewed at age 76 in 1992, described this intergenerational influence. "My daughter became a lawyer, specializing in women's rights. When she asked why I supported her unconventional career so fiercely, I finally told her about my time in the comfort facilities and the British recovery program. I explained how addressing me as Miss Ferraro, rather than by a number, transformed my understanding of my own worth. She has told me that story influences her approach to every client she represents." Statistical evidence documented broader societal impacts. Women who experienced British rehabilitation programs showed distinctive patterns compared to the general population. Survey data collected between 1975 and 1985 revealed that their daughters were 47% more likely to pursue higher education, 38% more likely to support women's equality initiatives, and 52% more likely to report exercising their voting rights consistently than age-matched peers. These findings suggested that witnessing maternal recovery from extreme degradation potentially inspired heightened appreciation for dignity and autonomy. The contrast between fascist dehumanization and British dignity-centered approaches provided valuable lessons for post-war humanitarian interventions. United Nations peacekeeping protocols developed in the 1990s incorporated specific references to the British rehabilitation model in sections addressing civilian women in conflict zones. The key principles: respect preceding rehabilitation, autonomy as therapeutic intervention, and dignity as fundamental right rather than earned privilege, influenced international humanitarian standards that continue evolving today. Maria's voice strengthened as she reached the conclusion of her address. When that British sergeant addressed me as Miss in 1943, I thought it was mockery or misunderstanding. I could not comprehend that a man in uniform would see me as deserving basic respect. That moment, so small it would seem insignificant in most lives, divided my existence into before and after. The transformation began not with grand gestures, but with this tiny restoration of humanity. The summary statistics she displayed on the screen behind her told a numerical story that complemented the human narrative. Italian comfort women documented in historical records. Approximately 14,300 women recovered by British forces. 2041. Average duration in fascist comfort system: 16.4 months. Average time in British rehabilitation: 11.7 months. Survivors who eventually documented their experiences: 412. Estimated second-generation individuals directly influenced: 2,740 academic studies published, 1990-1995, 37. These figures represented thousands of individual journeys from objectification to personhood, each beginning with the unexpected experience of being addressed with respect by those who had the power to continue their exploitation. The women who had entered British custody expecting continued degradation encountered instead a fundamental recognition of their humanity that contradicted years of conditioning. In the end, Maria concluded, what transformed us was not elaborate therapy or material provision, though both were necessary. The essential catalyst was being treated as people with inherent dignity when we had been thoroughly convinced of our worthlessness. The simple experience of being called Miss, rather than by a number, initiated a reconstruction of identity that continues even now, decades later. Our story demonstrates that even after extreme dehumanization, the capacity for reclaiming personhood remains. But first, someone must recognize the person waiting to re-emerge. As the audience rose in standing ovation, Maria's gaze found her granddaughter in the front row, a young woman studying international humanitarian law, whose existence represented the ultimate refutation of a system designed to reduce women to temporary objects. The journey from nameless comfort woman to Miss Conti had extended across generations, transforming not only one life, but the many lives connected to it, demonstrating how dignity functions not merely as humane treatment, but as revolutionary force capable of undoing even the most systematic dehumanization.